Have you ever wondered what personal sacrifices former U.S. presidents face when they leave office? From restrictions in their daily lives to protocols that limit their freedom, discover the surprising rules that continue to shape their lives even after their term ends. What if you could never relax, not even after stepping down as the leader of the free world? The presidency of the United States is a position that transforms lives, but what happens when the door to the Oval Office closes for good? For former presidents, the reality of their life after office has a strange and eternal nuance. Lifetime security updates. Imagine living with the constant weight of the country's deepest secrets, from conspiracies to national security details. This peculiar curse doesn't end when they leave office. On the contrary, it becomes a perpetual shadow that follows them everywhere. Every former president retains the privilege or burden of receiving security briefings, but there's a twist. The sitting president has the absolute power to decide whether their predecessor continues to receive those briefings. The most notable case happened in 2021, when Joe Biden blocked Donald Trump's access to these briefings after the events of January 6th. Was it a matter of national security or just plain politics? To these briefings after the events of January 6th. Was it a matter of national security or just plain politics? This episode set a precedent. Confidential information is both a weapon and a gift. The context becomes more intriguing if you think about the implications. What happens if a former president, in their retirement, knows too much? These updates perpetuate their connection to power and keep them as key players in a political game that never ends. But there's something deeper behind all of this. Secrets aren't just data, they're pieces of a legacy that could change the course of history if they fall into the wrong hands, and that's the crux of the matter. These briefings not only protect the former president, but they also ensure the continuity of a system that can't afford to falter. But the question that arises is disturbing. At what price? Never forget what you can't say out loud. Respect is a rare currency in politics, and even more so when it comes to those who have held the highest position in the country. However, there's an unspoken rule that compels former presidents to avoid speaking ill of their predecessors or successors. Is it a matter of decorum or just a strategy to protect their own interests? Let's take a step back a few decades. In the 1960s, the public dignity of former presidents was almost sacred. Discussing the mistakes of another president in public was unthinkable. But the 21st century changed the game. Social media became a dangerous weapon, and the opinions of former presidents began to resonate with an intensity never seen before. The impact of these statements can be devastating. One wrong word can collapse years of teamwork, further polarize the nation, or stoke political rivalries that should never exist. This is where the norm becomes a moral challenge. How far can one go to protect the facade of unity? Of course, not everyone follows the rule to the letter, but when the cameras are rolling and the microphones are on, everyone seems to remember that words, like knives, cut deeper when they come from someone who once sat in the same chair. The strange game of presidential libraries. Have you ever dreamed of creating your own monument to history? For former presidents of the United States, this isn't a fantasy, but an obligation. Each one must build a presidential library, an eternal archive that keeps the secrets of their time in power. The origin of this tradition is fascinating. It all started with Franklin D. Roosevelt, who saw the importance of preserving the presidential legacy. Since then, every president has followed this path, leaving not just a collection of documents, but also a carefully curated narrative of their own version of events. Some have used these libraries to redeem themselves, like Richard Nixon, whose archive includes all the details of the Watergate scandal. Others, like George W. Bush, have used them to justify controversial decisions, such as the invasion of Iraq. But what about the presidents who prefer to hide certain aspects of their term? The law is clear. Everything, absolutely everything, must be public. This includes emails, private notes, and in some cases, uncomfortable confessions. Libraries show power fades. Secrets emerge. They are tangible reminders that power, no matter how great, is not eternal. In the end, all secrets come to light. And each library is a silent testament to the fragility of those who once ruled the world. Imagine that you'll never be able to drive your own car again. For most people, driving is an everyday activity that symbolizes independence and freedom. However, for the presidents and former presidents of the United States, this simple action is prohibited. Since the administration of Lyndon B., a rule was put in place that prevents these leaders from getting behind the wheel on public roads. This measure, while not a formal law, is strictly enforced by the Secret Service to ensure the safety of those who have held the highest position in the country. The reason behind this restriction goes back to the tragic assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. F. Kennedy in 1963. Following this event, security measures for the leaders were reinforced, including a ban on driving. President Johnson was the last to drive in public in 1964, before the Secret Service adopted this rule. Although not a formal law, the Secret Service rule is enforced with unwavering rigor. And all presidents and vice presidents have followed this rule since then. This restriction also extends to former presidents, who, according to the Former Presidents Act of 1958, are entitled to lifetime protection provided by the Secret Service. For vice presidents, the restriction is temporary and is lifted 6 months after their term ends. However, there are exceptions to this rule. Former presidents can request special permits to drive on private property. For example, Joe Biden has been seen behind the wheel of his 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray on television shows, and George W. Bush used to drive his Ford F-250 Super Duty on his Texas ranch. Bush used to drive his Ford F-250 Super Duty on his Texas ranch. The driving ban for current and former U.S. presidents is a security measure that reflects the importance of protecting those who have led the nation. Even though it limits their freedom in certain ways, this rule aims to ensure their safety at all times. The surprising decision to forego Secret Service protection. Imagine living under the constant watch of agents dedicated to your security, a perpetual shadow that follows you every step of the way. For former presidents of the United States, this is the everyday reality, a lifetime protection provided by the Secret Service. However, in 1985, Richard Nixon made an unprecedented decision. He voluntarily gave up this protection. To date, he is the only former president who has chosen to forego this protection. Secret Service protection for former presidents was formally established in 1965, ensuring their safety and that of their spouses for life, unless they decided otherwise. This measure arose in response to the growing threats and the recognition of the importance of safeguarding those who have held the presidency. Nixon's decision to reject this protection was, therefore, a remarkable anomaly in contemporary history. The context of this decision is essential to understand his motivations. After his resignation in 1974 due to the Watergate scandal, Nixon faced unprecedented public scrutiny. His image was deeply tarnished and his relationship with government institutions was strained. Some analysts suggest that his renunciation of Secret Service protection was an attempt to regain a semblance of autonomy and distance himself from the state apparatus that he perceived had contributed to his downfall. Secret Service protection is not simply an escort, it involves a constant intrusion into one's personal life. The agents are present in almost every aspect of daily routine, which can be overwhelming for someone seeking privacy. For Nixon, who was used to control and discretion, this constant presence might have been an added burden in his attempt to rebuild his post-presidential life. It's important to note that even though Nixon gave up Secret Service protection, he wasn't left completely unprotected. He hired private security to ensure his safety. However, this decision had significant financial implications, as the costs of private security fell directly on him, unlike Secret Service protection, which is funded by the government. Nixon's decision remains an isolated case. No other former president has chosen to forego Secret Service protection, underscoring the uniqueness of his choice. This raises questions about the personal and psychological circumstances that led him to make such an unusual decision. Today, Secret Service protection for former presidents remains a topic of debate. Some argue that, in an era of increasing threats, this protection is more crucial than ever. Others question the cost and the necessity of such extensive surveillance. However, most agree that the safety of those who have led the nation is a responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. Nixon's choice to give up this protection invites us to reflect on the complex relationship between security and personal freedom. To what extent are we willing to sacrifice our privacy in the name of security? And, ultimately, what does it really mean to be protected? Nixon's story reminds us that even in the highest positions, personal decisions can challenge established norms and leave an indelible mark on the historical narrative. Not even in death can they decide their own legacy. From the moment a president takes office, planning for their death becomes a disturbing yet inevitable reality. How can someone who has led a nation lose control over something as personal as their funeral? This is the peculiar fate of American presidents. They don't have full say in how they will be honored when the end comes. The tradition of funerals. Presidential funerals are as old as the nation itself. These events aren't just private ceremonies, they're meticulously planned state rituals designed to honor the legacy of those who led the country. However, what few know is that these ceremonies are not organized according to the absolute wishes of the deceased, but rather following protocols established by the Presidential Funeral Law and the United States Armed Forces. From day one in the White House, a president is subject to protocols that determine how they will be remembered in death. It's a rigid process, managed primarily by the commanding general of the Washington Military District. Every detail, from the resting place to the arrangement of the flags, is strictly regulated. Only two presidents, Johnson, F. Kennedy, and William Howard Taft, have been buried in Arlington National Cemetery, a place reserved for those who made a deep impact on national history. What's interesting is that this tradition isn't without its controversies. Presidents have some freedom to express their wishes, but these must align with military protocol and national standards. For example, George H. W. Bush requested that his funeral include a maritime ceremony, which was approved due to his service in the Navy during World War II. However, not all presidents have been able to personalize their farewells. A particularly notable case was that of Richard Nixon. After his tumultuous resignation, Nixon requested that his funeral be a discreet event, away from the pomp and official ceremony. Although some of his wishes were respected, the funeral still followed many state traditions, reminding the public that even in death, presidents are subject to a greater symbolism. But why so much rigidity? The answer lies in the purpose of presidential funerals. They're events designed not just to honor the deceased, but also to unify the country. In times of mourning, these ceremonies act as reminders of the continuity and stability of government. It's not just about the individual, but what they represent as national leaders. In retrospect, these funerals are a mix of personal homage and political statement. Even in death, presidents cannot completely disengage from their role as public figures. Every decision, from the music to the burial site, is scrutinized through the lens of history. It's a final reminder that the presidency is not just a position, but a legacy that transcends generations. The irony is that, even though presidents are the most powerful leaders in the world, they don't have full control over their final farewell. This raises deep questions about the nature of power and mortality. Can anyone really control how they will be remembered? And ultimately, does public tribute matter more than personal desire? These questions remain unanswered, but the history of presidential funerals reminds us that, even in death, service to the nation never ends. In every detail of these ceremonies, a clear message is perpetuated. U.S. presidents, even after they leave office, continue to be pillars of the national narrative. A legacy that, whether they like it or not, no longer fully belongs to them. They are never alone. For former presidents of the United States, solitude is an unattainable luxury. From the moment they leave office, a constant shadow follows them, the Secret Service. This protection, which lasts for life, means that every step, every conversation, and every personal moment is under the watchful eye of agents dedicated to their security. The mission of the Secret Service is clear: to protect the integrity of those who have led the nation. However, this protection comes with constant surveillance that can feel invasive. Former presidents can't move around without an escort, and their communications are monitored to prevent potential threats. This reality turns their daily life into a carefully orchestrated routine, where privacy is practically non-existent. The protection isn't limited to former presidents. Their spouses also receive this lifetime surveillance, unless they remarry. the children of former presidents are protected until they turn 16. This security network extends to ensure that any potential threat is neutralized before it materializes. The constant presence of the Secret Service can create tensions. Some former presidents have expressed a desire for more freedom. However, the reality is that protection is an unavoidable necessity. History has shown that high-profile political figures are potential targets, and any relaxation of security measures could have disastrous consequences. Technology has played a crucial role in the evolution of these security measures. The Secret Service uses a wide range of technologies and intelligence techniques to carry out its protection and law enforcement functions. This includes the use of surveillance systems, advanced security cameras, encrypted communication equipment, and other cutting-edge tools. The constant surveillance also has psychological implications. Living under constant observation can affect the mental health of those under protection, generating feelings of claustrophobia or anxiety. However, most former presidents understand the importance of these measures and accept them as part of their legacy and responsibility. In short, the life of a former president is far from being entirely private. The constant presence of the Secret Service serves as a reminder of their position and the responsibilities that come with it. Even though this surveillance might seem like a burden, it's essential to ensure their safety and that of their families in a world where threats are real and constant. Forbidden to return to public roads. For former presidents of the United States, one of the most curious and frustrating restrictions is the inability to drive on public roads. While it may seem like a small sacrifice compared to the responsibilities they had in office, this mandate is a symbolic renunciation of one of the most basic freedoms, the ability to take the wheel and drive themselves. Since the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson imposed this strict rule on himself, for safety reasons, driving on roads open to the public makes them easy targets, a vulnerability the Secret Service cannot accept. However, this rule isn't set in stone, nor is it part of any federal law. It's an unofficial policy, but it's enforced with the utmost rigor. George W. Bush, in an interview, admitted to not having driven on a public road since taking office. Even decades later, he is still escorted on every trip, whether it's for official events or personal visits. Other former presidents have sought ways to get around this ban, such as driving on their private property. For example, Ronald Reagan used to enjoy taking rides in his Jeep on his California ranch, a little escape from the reality of his post-presidential life. This rule also has deeper implications. For many, driving is a symbol of independence, and losing that autonomy can be a constant reminder that their life is no longer entirely theirs. Safety, in this case, becomes a barrier between them and a genuine connection to normality. Moreover, in an increasingly connected world, protective measures have ramped up with the use of advanced technologies to track vehicles and monitor potential threats. According to an article from the Security Studies Center at Georgetown University, vehicle tracking with devices like Stingray has been implemented to ensure that the vehicles used by former presidents are under constant supervision. Not everyone sees this measure as a burden. Barack Obama, for example, referred to this rule jokingly during a public appearance. The biggest luxury of not being president would be being able to go get a coffee without a whole logistical operation turning it into an event. This comment, while humorous, reveals a reality that few consider. Every movement, even the most mundane, is planned down to the last detail, and that includes how, when, and where they are transported. Ultimately, this ban is a reminder that power comes at a cost, even after leaving office. Even if they can drive a vehicle on a secluded ranch or on a closed circuit, former presidents know that the open road symbolizes a kind of freedom that is now a thing of the past for them. The sacrifice may seem small, but its meaning is immense. Personal security takes precedence over independence. And while citizens enjoy a simple stroll through the city, these former leaders navigate a path that is not only restricted by physical barriers, but also by the expectations of their legacy and the weight of their history. What is the real price of absolute privacy? Being a former president of the United States means giving up a significant piece of your life, even after leaving the Oval Office. One of the most unsettling aspects is the loss of privacy at all levels. From phone calls to mail, absolutely everything is under scrutiny. But how much are you willing to sacrifice to ensure national security? Imagine not being able to open your mail without a specialized team checking it first. This isn't paranoia. It's the reality. Secret Service agents and Postal Service workers work together to analyze every package, every envelope, looking for potential threats like chemical substances, explosives, or dangerous devices. This practice intensified after incidents like the suspicious packages sent to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in 2018, highlighting how vulnerable even the most basic communication can be. However, this control doesn't stop there. Former presidents can't make calls without knowing they're being monitored. Their electronic devices are set up by the Secret Service with restrictions that limit access to foreign-made technologies to avoid cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This level of surveillance can be frustrating for those accustomed to the autonomy that comes with the presidential office, but it is a strategic necessity to protect both the individual and the sensitive information that could be in their hands. A recent report from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, highlighted how the communications of world leaders and former leaders are one of the main targets of cyber attacks. This includes attempts at espionage, hacking devices, and extracting confidential information. According to this study, technological protection is just as critical as physical protection in today's world. This explains the insistence of the U.S. government on maintaining these extreme measures even decades after presidents leave office. For some, like Bill Clinton, these restrictions have been a source of public jokes. In an interview, he mentioned how he relied on Secret Service agents even to send basic mail. But behind the humor, there's a complex reality: the loss of control over the simplest actions of daily life. It's not just about opening an envelope or sending a message, it's about knowing that every action is being watched, analyzed, and controlled in the name of security. The most ironic thing is that this level of protection, designed to ensure safety, is often seen as a gilded cage. Former presidents not only give up their privacy, but also a part of their humanity. Constant surveillance can be exhausting, and while it has a noble purpose, it also raises tough questions about the boundaries between security and individual freedom. What is the real price of privacy? For former presidents, it's a trade-off they can never get back. Even when they no longer hold office, the shadow of their past remains, reminding them that absolute privacy is a luxury they can't afford. A paradox where the power they once wielded becomes the reason for their perpetual restriction. Silence is not an option, not even after the presidency. The presidency doesn't end when you leave office, and for former U.S. presidents, post-presidential life comes with an implicit mandate to maintain a balance between diplomacy and discretion. Although the Constitution does not require them to remain silent, political and social pressure traps them in a network of expectations. They can't speak ill of other presidents, not even if they want to. This rule, although unwritten, has become a symbol of the nation's institutional stability. In the past, former presidents were the guardians of decorum. They avoided public criticism of their successors or predecessors, projecting an image of unity to the country. This tradition, however, has changed dramatically with the age of social media. What used to be kept behind closed doors now has the potential to blow up on digital platforms with a simple tweet. The case of Donald Trump marked a turning point in this landscape. During his time in office and after leaving, his irreverent attitude toward this unwritten rule sparked a heated debate about the role of former presidents in today's politics. While some see it as a threat to political decorum, others view it as an exercise in transparency. No matter which side you're on, one thing is clear: this break from tradition is one of the reasons why the government of the Republic of Mexico has turned into a country at war. Has forever changed the tone of American politics. In an analysis conducted by the Center for Presidential Politics at the University of Virginia, it was found that the public comments of former presidents have a significant impact on the public's perception of the current administration. According to the study, criticisms from former presidents increase political polarization, but they also encourage greater scrutiny of government policies. This finding highlights the balance that former presidents maintain, influencing without harming the stability of the system. without undermining the stability of the system. On the other hand, there are figures like Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush, who during their post-presidential years chose a more conciliatory approach. Bush, who during his post-presidential years chose a more conciliatory approach. Carter, for example, channeled his energy into humanitarian initiatives through the Carter Center, steering clear of direct political debates. This stance has been praised as a model to follow, although not all former presidents have the patience or desire to stay on the sidelines. The challenge of this unwritten rule lies in the duality of its purpose. On the one hand, it seeks to preserve institutional stability by avoiding public conflicts between key leaders. On the other hand, it silences voices that could offer unique perspectives based on real experiences leading the country. Is this silence the sign of respect or a form of self-imposed censorship? The answer depends on who you ask. At the end of the day, a former president's ability to respect this rule is not just an act of diplomacy, but a reflection of their character. The pressure to stay silent can be overwhelming, but so is the urge to stand up for their ideals and past decisions. This constant back and forth not only defines their legacies, but also shapes the political narrative of the nation. Silence, for them, isn't an easy option. It's a double-edged sword, loaded with power and responsibility. Decisions shape history, just like during their time in office, can change the course of history with just a few words.